In the last video, we talked about two different types of methods to solve quadratic equations. We talked about graphing, looking for x-intercepts, and factoring, so that we could use that zero product property in order to break it into two sections and solve each one for one of our zeros. This is our third method, okay? And it stems from this question: what happens when you can't factor? All right, so we already saw that the graph isn't always reliable by hand, so factoring worked really well to find exact points. But what if you can't factor? So here is an equation here that it doesn't matter how you try, it won't factor. Does that mean it doesn't have solutions? No. It actually just means we have to use this third method that was developed, the quadratic formula. Okay? The quadratic formula is x equals negative b. This is a plus or minus sign. Okay, we're actually going to do both plus and minus. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, so it's just a formula that works every single time, and this actually works whether it can factor or not. Any quadratic equation can be solved using this equation. Okay, here are your basic steps. Step 1, it must equal 0. So just like with factoring, we got to get it equal to 0 first. Okay. Step 2, we then find our a, b, and c. So think about standard form. So your standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay. A is always the coefficient to x squared, b is the coefficient to x, and c is your constant. And then once you find your a, b, and c, you plug them into the formula. If you see a b, put in b. If you see a, put in a. If you see c, put in c. And I want to put a reminder here that it's always good to use parentheses. Let's see if I can spell that. Parentheses. Okay, parentheses help make sure you have your negatives in the right spot. And then once you have it all plugged in, you're going to simplify. And you're going to have to simplify, simplify, simplify until you come out with as close to an exact answer as possible. I recommend starting with what we call the discriminant. The discriminant is part of the formula. It's that b squared minus 4ac. And we're actually going to explore the discriminant later in class. But the discriminant's right here underneath the square root. Okay? So let me go through an example. Example 1, 2x squared minus 2x minus 5 equals 0. Step 1, must equal 0. Check. Okay? Step 2, find a, b, and c. So underneath it, I'm going to say a is equal to 2, b is equal to negative 2, and c is equal to negative 5. It really helps to actually write this down so you know you're plugging in the positives and negatives in the right spot. Then I'm going to plug into my formula. So here's my formula. X equals negative b. So notice what I'm doing down here. I am actually going to just put parentheses where I need to plug in my numbers. So plus or minus the square root of b squared. Notice the square is after the parentheses here. Minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, the more you use this formula, the easier it'll be to memorize it, and you'll be able to do it quickly. So now I'm just going to go through and plug in my numbers where I need it. This is going to be negative b, so I put my negative 2. Notice the double negative. That is okay. There's always a negative in front, and then you just put in whatever b is here, positive or negative. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I put in my b of negative 2, minus 4 times a times c. A times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay? All right, so I'm going to simplify. And notice I said to start with a discriminant. So I'm going to start right here, and we're going to simplify right there. So I'm going to think negative 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. So I'm going to do this piece, and I'm going to do this piece. If you have a calculator, that is helpful here too, but I'm going to show you how to do it without one. Negative 2 squared is 4. And then I'm not going to say minus, I'm going to say negative 4 times 2 times negative 5. So negative 4 times 2 is 8 times negative 5 is positive 40. Sorry, negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40. So this becomes a positive 40. Okay? 4 plus 40, sorry about that. Four plus 40 is 44. So that's what's going to go right underneath here. Okay, so I'm going to go through and plug that in. X equals negative 2. When you have that double negative, that then becomes a positive 2, plus or minus the square root. And then what was our discriminant? It was 44. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, we're actually almost done here. Okay, we are going to just split apart our problem now. We can't simplify any further at this time, but we want to see our two answers. We want to see 2 plus the square root of 44 divided by 4 and 2 minus the square root of 44 divided by 4. So x equals 2 plus the square root of 44 over 4, and x equals 2 minus the square root of 44 over 4. Okay? Now these square roots can actually simplify a little bit. They're not perfect squares, but we can break them down, and we will do that in a separate video. Okay, but now I wanted you to see is that we have our two answers that we used to get with our factoring. Each one of these will give you a decimal answer in the calculator. You put in your numerator first, press enter, and then divide by 4, and you will get a decimal answer that you could actually graph. This is also representing a decimal answer that you could graph. Remember, they're representing your x-intercepts. All right, let's go through the process again. So first I got to check, am I equal to 0? In this case I am not. So I'm going to make it equal 0. So I'm going to add 5. Add it to the like term. If there's no like term, you just put it in standard form. X squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to find my a, b, and c. A equals understood 1 in front of that x squared, b equals negative 3, and c equals 5. Okay, now I'm going to take those and plug them into my quadratic formula. All right, here we go. X equals negative, plug in my b, plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, so let me actually plug in my numbers here. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, go through and simplify. Start with your discriminant. So inside the square root, we're going to evaluate what that is. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. Again, a calculator can help you here. You would type it exactly the way you see it. I'm going to do it by hand. Negative 3 squared is 9. Then remember, it's not minus, it's negative 4 times 1 times 5. If you do it that way, you'll get your sign more accurate. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. So because my answer turned out negative here, I put a minus, whereas over here my answer turned out positive, so I put a plus. And that's how you get that sign correct. All right, 9 minus 20 is negative 11. So I'm going to go back and plug that into my square root. All right, we have that double negative with our b again. So negative 3 is actually a positive 3, plus or minus the square root of negative 11, all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Okay, so we could split this apart. And we could look at our answers. Remember, it is giving us two different answers here. That's what that plus or minus is doing. But there's a problem on this one. Do you know what the problem is? Look underneath our square root. Can you take the square root of a negative number? You can't. You can't take the square root of a negative number. Right? So this poses a problem. If we tried to plug that in a calculator, we wouldn't get a decimal answer. So this isn't giving us an x-intercept, okay? This is actually telling us that there are, and we would write it as no real solutions. All right, so anytime you end up with a negative under the square root, check to make sure you didn't make a mistake, and then your answer would be no real solutions. And we'll actually explore what type of solutions they are later in the course, okay? Okay, so now we've gone through a couple examples. I just want you to be aware of there's 3 types of answers you can get from this. You can get 2 solutions, which we saw on the first example, right? And what's happening graphically, think of your parabola. Right, remember these are representing x-intercepts. That means our parabola is crossing the x-axis 2 times. Could be going up, could be going down, but we see this a lot, right? Now it is possible to get 1 solution, which means that graphically your parabola is touching the x-axis with the vertex, right? That's the only way it could touch once. And then no real solution, which we saw on the second example, happens when our parabola is maybe above and going up, or it could be below and going down, but it never crosses the x-axis. So if you end up with 2 solutions, 1 solution, or no real solution, then you've still done your problem correctly. If you end up with 3 solutions, you've done something wrong. Okay? So we will explore other types of solutions like no real solution once you have mastered quadratic formula.